Stop and take a good look at this picture. If you recognise this woman, you may be able to help solve a 45-year-old cold case. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the Camden Jane Doe. On the 28th of April 1979, the decomposing torso of a young woman would be found under the porch of an abandoned house in Camden, New Jersey. Over the next few days, more of her dismembered, decomposed limbs would be found in other abandoned houses. It was determined that the headless body had belonged to a young woman, presumably between 17 and 20-year-old, and how she met her death was horrific. She had both her wrists and her ankles bound together, and she was ferociously stabbed 8 times before being decapitated. It's believed that this young woman was black but light-skinned, that she was around 5'2", and that she was of slim build. This was based off of clothes that she was found wearing. Despite intensive investigation, police could not identify the woman. 11 years later, in 1990, her skull would be found in yet another abandoned house by some construction workers. After finding her skull, the authorities were able to get help in trying to reconstruct her face. By using her skull, they were able to create a model of what they believed she had looked like in life. The picture behind me is of that model. The picture was broadcasted all over the news and in all of the newspapers. However, no one has ever came forward to identify the Camden Jane Doe.
This doctor was so obsessed with one of his patients that when she passed away, he stole her body and kept her as his bride for years. This was the 1930s. Carl Tanzler was a doctor working in the tuberculosis unit of the hospital, which is where Carl met the beautiful 22-year-old Elena Helen Milagro, who was tragically suffering with tuberculosis, which had no cure at the time. 55-year-old Carl became immediately obsessed with the beautiful 22-year-old Helen. Carl actually claims that since he was a young child, he saw visions of the woman that he was destined to be with, and that it was Helen. So he says. But Helen doesn't really want anything to do with Carl other than him just treating her. I mean, the poor woman is suffering from a fatal disease. Dude, she has more shit to worry about. But like I said, Carl is obsessed with Helen. He says that she is the love of his life and he is determined to save her. But tragically, Carl was unable to save Helen and she ended up passing away, which Carl says left him absolutely heartbroken. He insisted on paying for Helen's entire funeral and an above-ground mausoleum for her. Helen's family agreed to let Carl pay for these things, but what they did not know was that Carl had the only key to Helen's tomb. For the next 2 years, Carl says that he visited Helen's tomb every single night, trying to preserve her body with chemicals. And after 2 years of this, he says that Helen's body started to talk to him, asking him to take her home. And so that's exactly what Carl did. He stole Helen's body and brought her to his house after she had already been passed away for over 2 years. Carl created glass eyes for her, paper mache silk to look like skin, and even more things just to make Helen appear more like she did when she was still alive. And then Carl kept Helen's body in his bed for the next 7 years. He slept next to her, he kissed her, plus some things I'm not even gonna say, but I'm sure you can guess. And to have your body disrespected like that for almost a decade is just disgusting. I'm not exactly sure how, but I'm guessing it had something to do with the smell. But there were rumors about what Carl was doing throughout the town, which got back to Helen's family, who called the police. Which is how this all finally came to light and Carl was arrested. But unfortunately, by the time that Carl was arrested, the statute of limitations was already up for the crimes that he committed, so he had to be let go with 0 repercussions for what he had done. This case really blew up in the media, so much in fact, and this is really gonna piss you guys off, but Helen's body was put on display for people that were interested in this case to go look at. Actually, over 7,000 people went to look at Helen's body like she was some kind of attraction. There's even photos online of what Helen's body looked like after Carl had been disrupting her and defiling her for almost a decade. I'm not going to show you. If you wanted to find them, they're online. I'm only mentioning it because I know if I didn't, the comments will. Case honestly really pisses me off so much because this poor girl passed away so young, and then her body was defiled by this creepy man for almost a decade and then put on display for people like she was some kind of attraction. And then once they finally did put her to rest, they had to put her at a unmarked grave so people wouldn't try to mess with her body even more. So this poor girl can't even be laid to rest under a grave that has her name on it. It's devastating. This case is honestly just filled with so many really upsetting, frustrating details. Carl actually had a lot of supporters after all this came to light, many whom were women who wanted to date or sleep with him. But as far as we know, he never took anyone up on that offer because he lived alone until he died with a life-size Helen doll that he had made, because he's just so disgusting. Before Carl died, he even wrote a book about this. So not only did he not suffer any consequences for what he did to Helen, he actually made money off of it. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. I know it was kind of longer than I usually do. Some of you guys have been asking me for some longer videos, so I decided to give it a shot. Let me know if you liked it or if you prefer the 3-minute mark that I usually try to stick around.
This 16-year-old truly believed that he was a 500-year-old vampire. Roderick Rod Farrell was born in March of 1980 in Murray, Kentucky. When his parents had them, they were teenagers themselves, and right after he was born, his father left to go to the military. His mother, Sandra, was the one who raised him, and they lived on and off with her parents for years. At the age of 5, Rod was essayed by his grandfather, but no charges were ever filed. When they weren't living with her parents, they would live in public housing, and Sandra would work as an exotic dancer. Sandra admitted to dabbling in vampirism, and as soon as Rod was a teenager, he followed in her footsteps. Rod was a fan of fantasy role-playing games, and him and other teenagers would live this vampire lifestyle. While they were all together, they would all wear black, listen to gothic music, and drink each other's blood. Rod's mom was also in this vampire clan, and she would be writing letters to this 14-year-old boy who was also in the same clan, telling him that she was going to be his bride for eternity. In 1990, Rod and his mom ended up moving to Florida since her parents got a home over there. Once Rod began living there, he met a girl named Heather Wendorf, who was described as a troubled teen who would disobey her parents every time they would ask her to clean her room. Once Rod moved back to Kentucky in the 10th grade, he would still keep in contact with Heather, and since they were on the phone so much, this would cause very expensive phone bills, and her parents wanted to put a stop to it. Back in Kentucky, Rod told people that he was a 500-year-old vampire, and he began recruiting followers. It seemed like Rod was recruiting troubled teens, and in October of 1996, they all broke into an animal shelter and killed 2 puppies. In November of 1996, Rod and 3 others drove all the way to Florida from Kentucky to pick up Heather so that they could move to New Orleans to become a vampire family. On November 25th, everyone was at a cemetery so that Heather could cross over to become a vampire once she drank Rod's blood. Rod and Scott entered Heather's home to steal her parents' car so that they could take it to New Orleans, but while they were inside of the home, they also unalived her parents. Heather's 17-year-old sister is the one who found their parents' dead bodies, and apparently Heather didn't know that Rod was going to take the life of her parents. After 4 days on the run, police caught up with the group on November 28th. Once they were arrested, Rod claimed that he was being framed by a rival group of vampires. Scott pled guilty and was given 2 life sentences. Dana was given a 17-year sentence, and Charity was given a 10-year sentence. As for Rod, he pled guilty to 2 counts of murder, and he will be released when he is 51 years old. As for Heather, she never got into any kind of trouble for her parents' death.
Neighbours saw this famous news presenter running out of the house soaked in blood. This time she wasn't reporting the crime, she was the crime. This all happened on the morning of Halloween at roughly 7:50 a.m. in Wichita in Kansas. A frantic call came into police about a stabbing. Now, Angie Mock was a 47-year-old who was pretty well known in the area for being a news anchor. She'd previously worked for a Fox News station in St. Louis for a few years, around 2011 to 2015. She'd previously been this stunning woman, super glamorous, a very recognizable face on their TV screens. But a neighbor got a huge shock that morning when she saw Angie staggering out of a house soaked in blood. Angie then snatched a phone from this neighbour and called 911. She ran back in the building and mumbled something about having to save herself. And when police raced over to the scene, they found Angie stood outside of the property. And she had injuries. We don't 100% know exactly what injuries, but I've heard that she had cuts on her hand, and like I said, she was absolutely soaked. She was rushed to hospital herself, taken for her own wounds, but there was a victim inside. Inside the house was her elderly mum, and she was in a horrific state. She was found totally unconscious in her bed. Her name was Anita. She was about 80 years old, and she had so many stab wounds, the police were stunned. She was raced to hospital, but unfortunately, she was pronounced dead as soon as she got there. Now, at first, it wasn't really clear whether both of these women had been attacked by like a random home intruder. That's certainly what some people presumed. But then in a really shocking turn of events, Angie was arrested for murder. She is currently being held on $1 million bond, and I'm really intrigued as to what the potential motive could have been here.
She had no idea that her first date was going to end with her being dismembered. 19-year-old Sade Robinson was from Milwaukee, and she was known for her curiosity and determination. After high school, she enrolled at Milwaukee Area Technical College because she wanted to get her degree in criminal justice. While in school, she was balancing 2 jobs, and she did that so that she could rent her own apartment for herself. Even though Sade had 2 jobs, she always made sure to make time for herself, like going out and being social. On April 1st of 2024, Sade made plans to go on a date. Earlier that day, Sade had expressed how excited she was for this date to an employee of her apartment complex. This guy that she would be going on this date with would be 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. Around 4:15 that day, Sade had texted Maxwell to see where they were going to meet up for their date, and he suggested this place called the Twisted Fisherman Restaurant. This was a spot that Maxwell knew pretty well because he had worked there, and it worked out for him because he was going to be picking up his W-2 form there as well. About an hour later, the two met at the restaurant, and they were sitting at the bar area, eating and drinking, and it seemed like they were having a really good time. Once at 6:30 p.m., the two are seen leaving the restaurant and going towards the car. They head to another bar called Duke's on Water and are seen having a few more drinks. It's now 9:06 p.m. and they are leaving the bar, and Maxwell has convinced Sade to go back to his house. Sade was fine with this because she had this app called Life 360 on her phone, and her mom and friends could see her location at all times. It's now the following day, April 2nd, and Sade was supposed to go to work, but she never showed up. At this point, no one can get a hold of Sade, not her mother, her friend, her manager, so her friend AJ goes to the police department to report her as missing. When her friend AJ is at the police station, she's telling police that the last time she heard from her friend was the previous night when she sent her a Snapchat when she was at this bar called Duke's on Water. That very same morning, the Milwaukee Fire Department had responded to reports of a vehicle on fire. It was a 2020 Honda Civic, and it was registered to Sade. When investigators were looking through her trunk, they found her cell phone and the clothes that she was wearing on her date. Where her car was found, there was a camera in the parking lot, and it showed a man walking away from her burning car around 7:29 a.m. Aside from the camera, a witness came forward that he saw a man get out of the car, throw a lighter into it, and just walk away as it was bursting into flames, and he was wearing a dark gray hoodie with a tan backpack. Around 5:30 p.m. that same day, a human leg was found by someone at Warnemont Park. As they were investigating the leg, it appeared to belong to a female because it had pink nail polish on the toenails, and it also appeared to be sawed off. Luckily, there were security cameras in the area of the park, and they also found pieces from a Honda Civic. Another one of Sade's friends had called police telling them that she had been tracking her location with the Life 360 app. According to the app, her last known location was at that park around 4:30 a.m. and that's where they found that leg. With this information, investigators got a warrant for Sade's phone, and as they were looking through her text messages, they saw text messages between her and Maxwell. On April 4th, law enforcement pulled over Maxwell as he was driving. Once Maxwell was in custody, they did a search warrant on his home, and once they went inside, they found blood on one of the beds and blood on the walls leading to the basement. On April 6th, more of Sade's human remains would be found. It seemed like Maxwell was placing Sade's human remains in different places so that it would be harder for police to locate. In June, Sade's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Maxwell for emotional distress. Police arrested Maxwell, and of course he pled not guilty, but he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
This is by far one of the scariest unsolved murders. Let's talk about it. This is Russell and Shirley Dermond. They were married for 64 years and went on to have 4 kids together. They were living in a nice house in a gated community on Lake Oconee in Putnam County, Georgia, and they were really enjoying their peaceful retired life. They were extremely loved by the community, but on May 6, 2014, their lives would tragically end. Russell and Shirley were last seen alive on May 1st running some errands in Eatonton, and they last spoke to their son later that same day on the phone. A few days later on May 3rd, the couple was supposed to attend a party with their neighbors for the 2014 Kentucky Derby, but they never showed up. 3 more days would pass with no word from the Dermonds, and their neighbors became so worried that they went to their house to check on them. When they arrived, they found that the front door was unlocked, so they let themselves in. Everything inside the house seemed perfectly fine, but when the neighbor entered the garage, they found Russell's decapitated body lying in a pool of blood surrounded by towels. They obviously called 911 immediately because of the horrific scene, and when police arrived, they quickly realized that Shirley was missing. Police initially thought that Shirley had been kidnapped, so a massive search was launched. But sadly, 10 days later, Shirley's decomposed body was found floating in Lake Oconee by a couple of fishermen. She had initially been weighed down by 2 30-pound concrete blocks. According to the autopsy, Shirley died from 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object. Authorities initially believed that the murder stemmed from a robbery, but there were no signs of a break-in and nothing was taken from their home. Hundreds of tips and leads started pouring in, but to this day, the case remains unsolved. And the most horrifying part is that Russell's head has never been found. According to reports, gunshot residue was found on his collar, leading authorities to believe that he was decapitated after being shot in the head in order to stop police from finding the bullet. Over the years, people have speculated that the Dermonds' deaths were related to their oldest son, Mark. Mark was killed in Atlanta in 2000 during a drug dispute, but police strongly believe that there is no connection. What makes this case so confusing is that there's still so many unanswered questions. Police still don't know whether or not the killer entered through the front gate of the community or if they had access to the back of the house by boat, but they do believe that multiple people were involved. Police also believe that the towels surrounding Russell's decapitated body were placed there to stop his blood from seeping out underneath the garage door. And as far as the concrete blocks tied to Shirley's body, investigators said that a professional would know that that wouldn't work. So the question remains on who would do this and why. According to police, new DNA evidence and cell phone data was discovered last year that they are hoping will lead to the people responsible, but they don't know if it's enough DNA evidence to be run through CODIS or if it even belongs to the killer. At this point, it could still just belong to Russell and Shirley. Investigators are using new technology to analyze the recent cell phone data found that wasn't existent in 2014, so they remain hopeful. But it's now been 10 years, and whoever killed Russell and Shirley and took his head is still out there.
After murdering her husband, this woman hid his dead body in her flat for 18 years. His corpse would sometimes be underneath the bed that she slept in at night. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of John Sabine. After fighting in the Korean War, 28-year-old John Sabine would be admitted into a hospital in London. While here, he took a liking to a 17-year-old nurse named Leanne. Leanne was a very confident, bubbly, outgoing young woman, and she caught John's eye. Quickly, the two began a romantic and a physical relationship. Leanne liked the look of him, and John was besotted with her. At this moment in time, however, John was already a married man, and he already had children, all of who he left behind to start a new life with Leanne, who he had gotten pregnant. Leanne and John would go on to have 4 children, and after getting into some sort of financial issues, the family decided to immigrate over to New Zealand. Once they were here, they had another baby, but they didn't stay in New Zealand for a very long amount of time at all. Once again, they were packing their bags and they left the country to go to Australia. This time, however, John and Leanne decided to drop off all 5 of their children at a local orphanage, abandoning them before fleeing, never to see them again. In 1997, a now 67-year-old John and 56-year-old Leanne were back in the UK living in South Wales. Shortly after their arrival, John would mysteriously disappear, and anyone who asked Leanne about John, where he had gone, what he was doing, Leanne would tell them that he had left after another woman, and so no one had any reason to question where he was. Leanne would continue to cash in John's pension and went on living her life. She would be given the nickname Mad Lee by locals and people who she had befriended over the years. This is because she was very eccentric, flamboyant, she was over the top, and she always had the most wild stories to tell. People would naturally gravitate towards her just to hear what she was going to say, even though most of the time you couldn't trust her as far as you threw her, because most of what she said was a pack of lies. One of her favourite stories that she liked to tell was about a medical skeleton that she had taken from one of the hospitals that she worked at when she was a nurse. She would tell people about this medical skeleton and said that she had taken it from the hospital as a little reminder of her nursing career. She spoke about this skeleton quite a lot. Like I say, it was her favourite story to talk about. In 2015, Leanne would be diagnosed with brain cancer, and quickly her health began to deteriorate. During a trip to the hairdressers, Leanne told one of the hairdressers, quote, "People are going to talk about me after I have gone. I could be famous." When pressed by the hairdresser asking why, she responded, quote, "Because of the body in the bag." This was laughed off by the hairdresser, who, just like so many other people Leanne spoke to, brushed off what she said as sarcasm, even when she was alluding to something sinister. Leanne Sabine died in October 2015 at age 74. Following her death, two of Leanne's friends were reminiscing about her, sharing old stories and what Leanne had told them, and all of the random stuff that she would come out with, and eventually the topic landed on that medical skeleton that she always went on about. These two friends decided that they were going to dig it out. They were going to dig it out and prop it up somewhere to prank or to scare another resident of the apartment block that they lived in. At this moment in time, the skeleton was being stored in sort of a communal shed, and so the two friends went to go and retrieve it. They found the tightly, thickly wrapped up skeleton and pulled it out. They cut into whatever the skeleton was wrapped up in, and some sort of fluid began to leak out of it onto their hands, the distinct smell of death radiating into the air. Police were quickly called, and when they arrived, they were able to determine that this was not a fake medical skeleton. This was a mummified, decomposed human body. It would take around about 3 weeks, however, it was confirmed that this body was that of John Sabine. His cause of death would be determined to have been from blunt force trauma, and after investigating and speaking to John and Leanne's friends, the police believe they know exactly what happened. A mutual friend of Leanne and John told the police that in 1997, bear in mind we are now in 2015 and this friend is only just speaking out and only just talking to the police. This mutual friend told them that one day in 1997 she rang up Leanne to ask how she was doing and asked if she was still with John because they hadn't heard from him in a while. Leanne responded to this, quote, "It's funny you should ask. I've killed him. I hit him over the head with a stone frog, which was at the side of the bed." This friend, just like the hairdresser and just like so many other people that Leanne would come into contact with, brushed it off as Leanne being sarcastic and having a morbid sense of humour. Miraculously, the police were able to track down the stone frog. One of Leanne's friends had actually kept a hold of it, and when they compared this frog to John's injuries, they matched up perfectly. Leanne Sabine murdered her husband by bludgeoning him over the head with a stone frog. She then wrapped up his body in 40 layers of plastic and hid him in her flat, sometimes under her bed and sometimes in the communal shed. She had successfully managed to conceal John's murder, hiding his body in her flat, and evaded justice for 18 years. Because she died before any of this came to light, and from what I could find there was nothing left behind, we have no idea why she decided to murder her husband.
When you learn the details behind this pregnant teen's disappearance, you are going to be so shocked and pissed off. This is one twisted case. Ayanna Sawyer was a sophomore, only 16 years old when she disappeared. Ayanna was a straight A student. She was an honors student. She was actually on track to graduate early, which is not easy to do. But Ayanna was actually keeping a huge secret and had just confessed to her mom that she was pregnant. 5 months pregnant with a little girl she named Hazel. Ayanna is supposed to graduate early. She's already receiving scholarship opportunities. She wants to be a doctor or a lawyer. So Ayanna's mom, Kimberly's like, oh my God, Did my daughter just throw away her entire future? And also, who's the father? Because she really wasn't getting a straight answer out of her 16-year-old daughter, Ayanna. And as far as she knew, Ayanna wasn't dating anyone. Then everything changed in December 2018 when Ayanna never came home from school. And this was so unlike her, and the entire family was concerned. It was chaos. They took a look at the school's security footage, and it actually showed Ayanna leaving the school herself around 11 a.m. carrying these 2 large bags, later confirmed to be filled with a lot of her belongings, her clothes, and a large amount of her really nice Victoria's Secret garments. So now it's starting to look like this brilliant, beautiful teenage girl who's only a couple months away from being a mom herself has run away, which is so unlike her character. Turns out there had been multiple adult men that had been preying on Ayanna since she was 14 years old. There was one adult neighbor that was proved to have slept with Ayanna when she was 14, 15 years old, and Ayanna's mother, Kimberly, did everything right. She immediately had this man arrested and put on the list. It turns out there was another man that was hurting Ayanna, but this time he was in the family. Ayanna's mother, Kimberly, had a sister named Naomi, and Naomi's husband, Jonathan Quillis, was known throughout the family to be kind of weird with the younger girls, especially Ayanna. Ayanna's aunt, Naomi, knew that her husband was Snapchatting her underage niece and kind of suspected that something was going on, but did nothing to stop it or tell her mother. So around the time that Ayanna's mother is finally learning about all of this, her younger daughter, Ayanna's baby sister, finally admits that Uncle Jonathan was the father of Ayanna's baby and had even tried to touch her when she was only 13 years old. So Jonathan is definitely getting looked at, obviously, as the main suspect, but they don't have any evidence against him. And that's when Jonathan's brother dropped a bomb on the entire case. Jonathan's brother told the police that his brother Jonathan confessed to not only being the father of Ayanna's baby, but unaliving her so it wouldn't ruin his life. Honestly, I have so much respect for Jonathan's brother for turning in his own family member, because it's so rare that we see that in cases, and honestly, this case might have gone unsolved if it wasn't for that. Not only did Jonathan confess to his brother, but he also confessed to multiple inmates as well, kind of bragging about the whole situation, honestly. But he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with no DNA evidence or even ever finding Ayanna's body, which is really, really hard to do. I really wanted to talk about Ayanna's case today to bring awareness to the fact that the leading cause of death of pregnant women in the United States is homicide. I don't think this is a fact that a lot of people know, and maybe if more people talk about it, hopefully something can change. Thank you so much for listening to Ayanna Sawyer's case today, and also the case of her unborn daughter, Hazel. Keep discussing with me in the comments and leave any more case suggestions you'd like to see me cover next.
This is the story of Travis Lewis. September 10th, 1996, police responded to a fire at the Snowden Mansion on Horseshoe Lake in Arkansas. The Snowden family was very popular in Arkansas. The mansion has been around for generations. It was a bed and breakfast. It was also a Snowden Avenue. They even had a school named after them. If you ever seen the movie The Client, this mansion was featured in it. In the fire, they found the bodies of 75-year-old Sally McKay and her nephew, 52-year-old Joseph Baker, who worked at the bed and breakfast. But detectives soon figured out that Sally and Joseph didn't die from the fire. They were both shot in the head. It was also some antiques missing from the mansion, and Sally's car was missing. Evidence linked back to 16-year-old Travis Lewis, who was a neighbor's son in the Snowden community. Travis was the only kid in the neighborhood not in school that day, and his DNA was in Sally's car. In 1998, he pled guilty for the fire and the robbery, but he said he did not kill Sally and Joseph. He said it was a friend who did it, but there was never any evidence indicating that it was anybody with him. Travis Lewis was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Fast forward to 2004, 63-year-old Martha McKay, who's the daughter of Sally McKay, decided to move back to Arkansas to renovate her mother's bed and breakfast, which was successful, but that's not it. Martha has been keeping in contact with Travis Lewis, the same person who killed her mother in 1996. Martha said he was young, she's a Buddhist, and in Buddhism, we forgive. The first 3 times Travis was up for parole, he got denied due to the Snowden family. They all voted no, except for Martha. But in 2018, the fourth time his parole came up, he was paroled due to Martha's help. Her family was furious, and rightfully so. Martha, why? He was released in 2018, and Martha employed him. She allowed him to come and work at the bed and breakfast. Not only him and his mother, but his mother was working there prior to him getting out. Their relationship was going good for a good 2 years. You would think that this was a good redemption story until 2020, when Travis's mother tapped Martha on the shoulder and said, "You might want to let him go. He's going back to his old ways." Martha still wanted to give this boy a chance, who's now in his 30s, until early March of 2020, Martha sold a chandelier for $10,000. She brought the money back to the mansion, and Travis was the only one working. She stashed the $10,000 away, and the next day, it was gone. It was then that Martha finally fired Travis. But later that month, March 25th, 2020, the police responded to Martha's house due to her alarm. When the police got there, the back door was open. But before they can enter, they seen Travis jumping from the second floor window. He jumped in his car trying to escape, but he didn't get very far. His tires got stuck in the line, so he hopped out on foot and jumped in the lake. But he didn't come back up. Martha was found at the top of the steps wrapped in blankets. Next to her was a bag of antiques Travis was trying to steal. Rescue divers found Travis that evening. Autopsy report shows that he had cocaine and methamphetamine in his system. Rest in peace to Martha. That was a sweet, forgiving lady. I'm still holding grudges from school. I can never be this forgiving.
Do you want to know what this man said? Because I'm going to tell you and you're going to be like, how could he be so stupid? Quick intro. Are you guys mad at me? Don't be mad at me. I'm so sorry. I haven't posted in so long. It's actually been horrible. Like every single day I think about you guys. I want to talk to you guys. I drank a lot of coffee today. Okay, let me chill. I took a few days off. I was traveling and I put so much effort into these stories that I can't just like whip up a video last minute. So I'm sorry about that. Will not happen ever again. But there's no time to waste. Let's get straight into today's story. Also, episode 2 of the podcast out today. That's probably going to be up a little bit later. So go watch that later. Like if you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. I do need to give a warning for this video. This video does involve the death of a young child. So if you think that that is triggering to you in any way, shape, or form, or you think it's going to negatively affect your mental health, please skip this video. Skip this video and I will see you in my next one. Your mental health has always been and will always be #1 priority. So yeah, take care of yourselves. Love you. Richard Allen Davis was born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. He was the middle child. He had 2 older siblings and 2 younger siblings, and he grew up in a deeply dysfunctional and violent home. His parents, both of them, were just horrendous people. They were horrible to each other, and the kids grew up seeing that. Their family was very unstable. They moved around all the time as well, which only made things harder, and the parents were both very neglectful to all the children. And on top of that, there was frequent physical mistreatment shown more oftentimes than not to the children. Richard's mother would use violence to discipline her children. But the thing is, it doesn't even sound like she was trying to teach them a lesson, to teach them right for wrong. It was just more so her punishing them when they got in trouble and doing things to them on purpose to harm them and to inflict pain on them. When Richard was 10 years old, his parents separated and all of the kids chose to stay with the father. From that moment on, the mother, which probably was a good thing, basically walked out of their life. She never cared or made any kind of efforts to see them ever again. And throughout the next few years, Richard's life remained awful. The dad brought a lot of harm to the children as well. At one point, the dad broke Richard's jaw from how bad he was hurting him. All that to say, all that Richard knew from the day that he was born was violence, and that would be something that Richard carried with him for the rest of his life. When he was so young in middle school and his early high school years, Richard Davis was in and out of juvenile detention centers and psychiatric institutions. He was showing serious behavioral issues that he had had his entire life. He was not a very well-liked person because there was something so alarming about him. And his first act of displaying aggression and or violent behavior was when he would start walking around the neighborhood that he lived in, weapon in hand, kitchen sharp weapon in hand, looking for people's pets, dogs, or cats to make his victims. I do not want to go into detail on that, but you know what I mean. At 15 to 16 years old, he started breaking into people's houses. At 17 years old, he got caught for theft, first stealing a motorcycle, and after that, he joined the army, but only for 13 months. After that, he was honorably discharged. This word. Honorably discharged. Question mark. By 1973, he was 19 years old. He had no job, no direction, and no remorse. And he decided that what he was going to do with his free time would be to go on a crime spree. He would break into people's houses and commit burglary. He did this over and over again, close to 20 times before he was caught. And then he was convicted and sent to prison. But that was honestly just the beginning of a pattern that he would repeat for the next 2 decades. Crime, prison, parole, repeat. Because when Richard would get in trouble for something and he would be behind bars, he would never learn anything except how to get better at not getting caught. He committed burglary again, he was caught again, went to jail again, and was released again. Do you see what I mean about a pattern? Then in 1976, when he was 22 years old, his crimes escalated. He decided that stealing just wasn't enough for him anymore. He wanted to take it a step further. He was looking for the adrenaline that he liked. He was kind of bored of just stealing houses. He wanted more because he liked the rush that he got when he did things that he knew were wrong. And at 22 years old, he decided to kidnap a woman, weapon in hand, a 26-year-old girl he saw at a parking lot. He snuck up to her, forced her into his car, and threatened to end her life. The woman was thankfully able to open the car door and escape. She flagged down a car to help her, which with her luck ended up being a police officer. And with his help, Richard Allen Davis was caught and once again arrested, sentenced, and sent to prison. When in custody, Richard faked unaliving himself, and it was ruled that he would be transported from a jail to a psychiatric hospital. And when he was being transported, he managed to escape some way, somehow, and just like that, he was out on the streets yet again. And what did he do? Well, he broke into another house with a woman inside, and he threatened the woman, hurt her physically in more than one way, and then he ran away. He then broke into an animal shelter, stole some money. He then attacked another girl at a parking lot with a weapon. She luckily was also able to escape. Then he broke into the house of another woman, left the house, and hid in the bushes. By the way, all this happened in less than a week, I think 5 days to be exact. But anyways, when he was inside the house, that woman's house, and then he went outside, hid in the bushes, he was watching this girl like a peeping Tom. But because he had broken into her house, this girl could tell that something was weird, and she was scared, and she called the police, and the police went over there, and they found Richard hiding in the bushes. Like, what a scary, disgusting man. Also embarrassing. How old are you? You're hiding in the bushes? Like, do you not have something else to do for fun? I don't understand. Anyway, he was finally rearrested and taken back to jail. He returned to jail not only to finish off his original sentence, but now he's handed more sentences for everything that he did in his little 5-day crime spree. So by this point, he's racked up a string of convictions: burglary, robbery, kidnapping, but somehow he just keeps getting out. And that's exactly what happened 6 years after. At 28 years old, he was released again, and to no surprise, he goes right back to doing the only thing that he knows how to do: committing crime. But this time around, he decides that he needs a little partner in crime, so he finds himself a little girlfriend, and she becomes his partner in crime. Together, they do everything that Richard has already done, but now they do it together. Across multiple state lines, they rob banks, they rob stores, they break into houses, they rob people, they do substances, they go out, they cause chaos, they threaten people. They are just complete and utter menaces together, violent, dangerous criminals, and they do this for 6 months until they get pulled over for a traffic violation. They get arrested and charged. For their 6-month crime spree, Richard was sentenced to 16 years, and his little girlfriend partner in crime received a 6-month sentence. Are you overwhelmed yet? Because I am. I know this is a lot, but stay with me. By July of 1993, Richard Allen Davis was a clear and obvious criminal. He had served time in at least 8 different prisons and violated parole more than once. Psychologists who saw him, met with him, talked to him, described him to be manipulative, hostile, dangerous, and beyond reform, meaning they didn't know what to do to help him, or I hate to say fix him, but you know what I mean. He was 39 years old at this time. He had only served 8 out of his 16-year sentence, but guess what? Do I even need to say it? He was released. He was released in July, and only 3 months later, he would commit his worst crime yet. 12-year-old little Polly Klaas lived in Petaluma, California. She was born January 3rd, 1981, and she lived in that quiet little town just north of San Francisco. She loved acting. She loved dressing up in costumes and performing plays in her living room. She was the cutest little girl, and she was like an inspiring actress from the moment that she was like 3 years old. She loved to act. She had long brown hair, the prettiest eyes, and the kindness that radiated through everyone around her. Her friends described her as the kind of girl who made everyone feel included. Her teachers thought that she was funny and creative, and her parents both referred to her as their little ray of sunshine. She lived with her mother Eve and her little sister. Her parents were divorced, but they had a very, very healthy co-parenting relationship. October 1st of 1993 was the day that everything changed for Polly Klaas. It was a Friday night, and she had 2 of her friends over for a slumber party at her mother's house, and the girls did what 12-year-old little girls do. They laughed, they played, they tried on Halloween costumes, they braided each other's hair, and around 10:30 p.m., Polly's mom went to bed. The little girls were still up playing, but just as the night was winding down, a strange and gross man crept into the house through a window, carrying a sharp weapon with him. When Polly opened the door of her bedroom to walk out and go grab sleeping bags for her and her friends, she saw Richard Allen Davis standing just outside of her bedroom.
This was Polly's biggest fear. She was a 12-year-old little girl who firstly was scared of the dark, but secondly was terrified of the boogeyman. She was always scared. It was always her biggest fear that the boogeyman would sneak into her house and kidnap her. And that night, her biggest fear was standing right before her eyes. Richard walked into Polly's room with his weapon and he ordered the girls to be quiet. And keep in mind, these are 3 children that we're talking about. They were so scared of what was happening. They probably didn't even understand what was happening. Richard ordered Polly's 2 friends to lie on the ground and not look up at him. He tied them up with strips of cloth, placed pillowcases over their heads, and whispered that he was only there to rob the place and he wasn't going to hurt them. Then he turned to Polly, and just like that, she was gone. No one screamed, no one ran. They were too scared. By the time that the girls did scream for help, by the time that they went to go wake up Polly's mother, Polly Klaas had vanished. Richard forced her into his car and he drove off with her. Minutes later, after realizing that Polly was gone, Polly's mom, Eve, called 911 and police arrived quickly. And the news of this traveled quickly. Petaluma was a quiet small town. Things like this did not happen in their town. Kids were not kidnapped from their house. Polly's friends, still very much in shock, were able to give police a description of the man who had broken in. A white male, stringy hair, smelled like, had a weapon, calm and calculated. Amber Alerts did not exist back then, but what followed was one of the biggest large child abduction searches in U.S. history. Flyers with Polly's photos were plastered across California. Pictures of flyers of her were all over telephone poles, store windows, and TV screens. Celebrities also helped spread the story. The air in Petaluma felt thick. It felt eerie. In the days following Polly's disappearance, parents started locking their doors, locking their windows. Sleepovers were canceled. Children were scared. Over 4,000 volunteers helped in the search. They walked fields, checked bodies of water, handed out flyers, and lit candles. FBI agents joined the search. Helicopters circled above. A hotline was used for the public to call in with any leads or any tips, and for the next 60 days, law enforcement did everything they could to find this little girl, but it seemed that the man who had taken Polly had disappeared without a trace. But what no one knew then was that only 1 hour after Polly was taken, the man who took her crossed paths with law enforcement and slipped right through their fingers. Just 1 hour after the kidnapping, Richard Allen Davis was spotted by a babysitter and her employer near a rural property in Sonoma County, around 40 miles away from where Polly lived. He was trespassing, he was acting strange, and he was covered in scratches. Police were called, they showed up, they spoke to Richard, they spoke to the owner of the house whose property he was on, asked the owner if they wanted to press charges, and the owner said, I don't want to press charges, just please get him off of my property. So the police talked to Richard, they ran his ID, they helped him get his car out of a ditch that it was stuck in, and they let him go. They didn't see Polly, they didn't know that this guy had just kidnapped a little girl 1 hour prior, they didn't know and somehow didn't find out after running his ID that Richard Allen Davis was a career criminal. That night he walked away and the officers did not connect him to Polly's disappearance. The search continued and spread quickly throughout the next 60 days, and on November 28th, 2 months after Polly Klaas disappeared, police received another 911 call. The property owner in Sonoma County, where Richard had been that night when he got his car stuck in a ditch, was cleaning something outside when she found something disturbing. Items belonging to a child, including torn ballet tights, a red sweatshirt, and a pair of red tights that matched what Polly had been wearing the night that she disappeared. She called police immediately and they came out to search the area. This was huge because they now realized for the first time that the night this man was found on this person's property was the same night that this 12-year-old little girl was taken from her house. And remember, they scanned his IDs. They had spoken to him, so they knew exactly who they were looking for. They knew exactly who their guy was. They found him, they arrested him, and they took him in for questioning. Polly's 2 friends were also able to confirm that that was the guy that they saw in Polly's bedroom that night. When officers arrested Richard, he didn't panic. He didn't try to run. He acted like a man who had played the system before and thought he still could. He honestly had a really weird and gross confidence about him. They sit him down and they ask him what he had been doing the night of October 1st, 1993, the night Polly Klaas disappeared from her bedroom. And do you want to know what this man said? First of all, he said the reason why he was in town that night to begin with was because he was visiting his mother. He said that day he was at a park and said he started to feel a little bit out of it, a little bit groggy. And then he said that what he did next was a blur. He didn't really know how or why he got to Polly's house. He couldn't say what he did. He said he didn't remember. He said that one moment he was at the park and the next he was in his car with this little girl and he was confused. Poor guy. Give me a break, dude. He said he crashed his car in a ditch. He was standing on that person's property and said that he took Polly out of his car, hid her in the bushes, then ran into the police, talked to the police. And when the police left, Richard went back to the bushes to find Polly and decided right then and there that this had gone too far. Polly had seen his face. She would be able to recognize him. And to avoid getting caught, he made the decision that he needed to get rid of her. He needed to end her life. So he drove her north to a wooded area. She was crying and begging. And then Richard, using a piece of cloth, tightened it around her neck, until she was gone. He ended her life. He dumped her body by a bush, covered it with branches and leaves, and then he left. He left her there for 60 days. Richard led authorities to the exact spot where Polly's body was. She was still wearing the same red tights that she had been wearing at her sleepover. Her body by this point had been severely decomposing and had been outside in the woods for 60 days for so long that they couldn't even test for her cause of death. Richard was charged with the death of Polly Klaas, and his trial began in 1996, nearly 3 years after Polly had been kidnapped. And Richard was facing charges for first-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary, and attempted. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculated monster who to silence a child and had a violent history that made his crime predictable. His defense spoke about his childhood trauma and tried to say that he was a damaged person and that's why he did what he did. Wrong. People have trauma and they don't other people. The jury found Richard guilty on all charges, and after the fact, Richard was given a chance to speak. He stood up, and with the cameras rolling in the courtroom, he made an obscene gesture. He put both of his middle fingers up in the air and delivered a vile and false claim. He said that Polly had told him that her father had SA'd her. He said that to her father in the courtroom. It was his final act of cruelty. He's disgusting. The judge, the jury, Polly's family were disgusted with his behavior. You could hear them gasping in the courtroom. The judge looked at Richard and said, quote, "Mr. Davis, this is not the time for you to spew garbage. Sit down," end quote. In 1996, Richard Allen Davis was sentenced to death. Today, he is 70 years old and he still is on death row. After the trial and after the sentencing, Polly's family faced the painful reality that even though justice was served, nothing could ever or would ever bring Polly back. Her father, Mark, channeled his grief into advocacy, founding the Klaas Kids Foundation to help protect children and support families of missing children. Polly's memory lives on through his work and in the hearts of those who followed her story. Her legacy became a symbol of change, prompting stronger laws around child abduction and inspiring a national conversation about child safety. Her family remembers her as a vibrant, loving girl who continues to be loved and missed every single day and will for the rest of their lives. That is all I have for today's story. It's heartbreaking. This is the most disgusting man that I've ever met, and I never want to speak about him again. But thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Polly's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Antoine Suggs. On September 8th, 2021, Antoine Suggs flew to Minnesota from his hometown, Arizona. Now, he was picked up from the airport by an unknown person in a black vehicle. But Antoine returned a couple days later to the airport on the late night of September 11th. Now, it's unclear of why he went back to the airport. He was not even in there long. But from the surveillance camera, we can see that somebody is in his passenger seat. Now, they think that it's Natosha Presley, but it was never confirmed. But Natosha's family did confirm that the two was romantically involved. If this is her, this is the last footage of her alive. She is one of the 4 victims Antoine kills this night. Now, when they left the airport, they picked up some friends. Lawrence Freeman, Matthew Pettis, and Jasmine Sturm. The group went to a bar called Shamrock's Pub in St. Paul, Minnesota. They left that bar at around 1 a.m. and went to another bar called White Squirrel. Now, on the surveillance camera, it looked like everybody was still getting along. You can tell everybody's been drinking, but they still look like they was having a good time. The camera caught the group getting into Antoine's Mercedes SUV at around 3 a.m. Now, at around 3:30 a.m., now September 12th, a house camera caught this. It was confirmed that that was Antoine's SUV riding down 7th Street in St. Paul. But what happened? Why did he kill these 3 people plus the woman he was dating? He drove around for hours trying to figure out what to do with the bodies. A surveillance camera at a gas station caught him getting out of the truck with what seems like a deceased person in the passenger seat. It's now around 10 a.m. on September 12th, and Antoine needs help disposing of these bodies. So he calls his father, 56-year-old Darren Osborne. Antoine asked his father to meet him at a gas station. The two met up at a BP. Now, Darren said that he had no idea that there were bodies in the car. His son just asked him to follow him. But is he lying? The surveillance camera from this actual gas station did show that there was no passenger in Antoine's car, which means that he did moved the bodies to the back. The two drove a couple hours from Minnesota to a cornfield in Wisconsin. That is where he abandoned his brand new Mercedes-Benz SUV with the bodies inside and made his way back to Arizona. The victims were found later that same day by a farmer. They all were shot in the head except for Natosha, the girl that he was dating. She was shot in the mouth. I don't know, that sounds a little personal. While Antoine is back at home thinking he got away scot-free, he left something. His ID was found on the floor in the back seat. His identification card was found on the ground in the back seat. With the finding of the ID, investigators tried to get in touch with Antoine, who was nowhere to be found. So they got in contact with his father, who they arrested first. Now Darren is still acting like he don't know nothing about no dead body. But that was a lie. They charged Antoine with murder on September 15th. He turned himself in the very next day on the 16th. And he told investigators that he told his father, "I snapped. I shot a couple people." He confessed to killing the 4 people, but he's claiming self-defense. Antoine said that he thought that they were trying to rob him. Nobody was buying that. In 2023, Antoine was sentenced to 103 years in prison. His father was sentenced to 5 years. It's still no explanation on why this happened. He just kept saying self-defense. The brand new black Mercedes-Benz truck was in his name. He had just got it 2 days before the murder. It was a cigarette butt by the truck in the cornfield, his DNA on it. Not to mention, his car was dripping blood. It was blood left in the parking lot of the 2 or 3 gas stations he went to. He was on surveillance camera everywhere. I think that father should have got more time. What y'all think?
Today's case is about a man who mysteriously disappears, but then his body was found in an area that had already been searched. And the condition of his body didn't make sense either. I'm talking about the strange death of Tommy Booth, a contractor who disappeared on January 19th, 2008. That night, he went to Bootlegger's Bar in Woodland, Pennsylvania to celebrate his friend's 21st birthday. Now, this wasn't a bar that Tommy would usually go to. It was far from home than he would normally drive, but specifically because he had epilepsy and he was on medication. But with all his friends together, Tommy figured one night out wouldn't hurt. At first, everything was normal, just a group of friends having fun, but then at some point of the night, Tommy got separated from his friend. At around 1:25 a.m., a fight broke out outside of the bar, causing most of the crowd, including Tommy's friends, to rush outside to see what was happening. And about 10 minutes later, Tommy's friends went back inside to find Tommy, because again, he wasn't there, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. They looked for like 30 minutes, and when they couldn't find him, they assumed he went home or he met a girl and left with her. So they left without him, and no shade to his friends, but if we're hanging out and you can't find me, you better not leave unless you see me. I'm just saying. Anyways, for the next few days, Tommy missed work, something completely out of character for him, and no one could reach him by text or phone. And that is when his family and friends knew, okay, something is wrong. He was reported missing, and authorities launched a massive search focusing heavily on the bar and the surrounding areas, including Ridley Creek, which was right behind the bar. But still, there was no sign of Tommy. It was almost as if he just vanished into thin air. 2 weeks later, authorities did a deep search through surveillance cameras around the area, and that's when they discovered Tom's body was discovered face down in Ridley Creek, just steps away from the bar where he disappeared. But that's not the strange part. Just listen. That creek had been searched multiple times before Tommy's body was found, and somehow no one had seen him. And the surveillance footage from the bars literally shows him entering but never leaving. So what creeps me out is, how was his body found outside the bar? Authorities did claim that the creek had frozen over, which I guess could partially hide his body from view, but that doesn't make sense to me either. That creek did not freeze over until after Tommy went missing, and even more strange was his body had already thawed out before they found him. And when I found out about the condition about his body, I knew almost immediately that someone is lying or hiding something about his disappearance. When Tommy was found, he was in full rigor mortis, which is something that only lasts about 48 hours after a death. I'm no scientist, but if Tommy was missing for 2 weeks, how was he still in rigor mortis? That would only make sense if Tommy was alive for those 2 weeks. So for those 14 days, where did he go? Again, the surveillance footage shows him entering the bar but never leaving. And adding to the mystery, his body showed fixed lividity on his back, meaning he had been lying on a hard surface for an extended period, yet he was found face down in the creek. His body wasn't bloated or severely decomposed, something that would have happened if he was dead in the water for 2 weeks. And if that's not weird enough for you, his body appeared to be staged as well. 3 sticks had been deliberately placed around his body, and there were clear drag marks in the mud, almost as if somebody had just dragged his body to the creek right before he was found. Police also found shoe prints on both sides of his body, and they noticed drag marks were going upstream against the current. But despite all of this, authorities ruled his death a probable drowning, no foul play. They claimed he likely got too drunk, wandered off, and accidentally fell into the creek. But none of that explains the condition of his body or the fact that he had seemed to be alive long after that night. But there is one more thing that's been keeping me up at night about his case. Near the creek where Tommy's body was found, there was a freshly painted smiley face on the wall of the bar. If you're familiar with the smiley face killer theory, then you just know how creepy this is. The theory suggests that a group of serial killers have been targeting young men across the United States, leaving smiley face graffitis near the body. Over 40 men, all drowned of mysterious circumstances, are believed to be connected to this theory. Many of these victims were college-age young men like Tommy, and some were believed to have been drugged with something called GHB, which is a substance that could only stay in your system for 12 hours. Tommy's toxicology report came back clear, but if he were to have been drugged, it's been 2 weeks. It wouldn't have shown up. And here's something else. When Tommy's body was found, his wallet and his money were still on him, but his cell phone was missing, and to this day, it has never been recovered. I don't know, that just keeps me up at night. So was Tommy Booth a victim of the smiley face theory, or was this just a tragic accident that just doesn't add up? 17 years later, Tommy's death is still a mystery, but one thing is for sure, it was not an accident.